Hi, poets. Liz Whiteacre here, and today we are going to think about poems that we've written in the past and what we can do when we revisit them to make sure that they are effectively communicating our messages to our audiences. In our first writing exercise, we looked inward. We thought about an obstacle we faced in the past and how we overcame it. And taking that time to process what we are experiencing in the world on the page helps develop our ability to process what's happening to us in the moment. So it goes hand in hand, that practice of poetry, and also its ability to help us move through life with a little bit more grace and ease. In our second exercise, if you notice, we were focused in on the photographer, and when we zoom out to see the whole scene and we become a witness, we get a different sense of the picture and what's happening. In the first photo, maybe she's just taking a picture of the sunset, and here we realize this photographer is dealing with a lot more in trying to capture this band's performance in front of a live audience in front of that sunset. So taking time to kind of zoom out and think about the context, think about different points of view, perspective, how things outside of ourselves are experiencing something along with us is another skill that is important to develop as a poet, not only to be able to communicate effectively with our audience on the page, but also moving through life. If we can pause for a moment, consider everything happening around our obstacle, things that might be influencing it, it can give us a little bit more control in how we want to respond to it, which can lead to healthy choices and greater sense of wellness. In this exercise, I'm going to ask you to find a poem that you've worked on. It could be one you've worked on very recently, one of our first two poems, or it could be something that you wrote in the past. But please pause the video for a moment to go find it. It can either be on a piece of paper, maybe in the notebook that you brought to the video, or it could be in a Word file, in which case you can kind of minimize our YouTube screen so that you can have it up next to your file. So please go get your poem and then press play. I'm going to be using the metaphor of pruning trees because it's something that I've started doing in real life as a homeowner. My family and I are on a property with quite a few old trees, and in the past decade, they've started to deteriorate, some of them, and we've had to have some cut down, and we've replaced them with young trees. And in thinking about those young trees' growth, I realized that I could take action early on in their lives and learn how to care for them so that when they became huge and big and old, they may not have the same type of problems that our older trees were having and just live healthier lives. So I hit YouTube. I started learning all about it. And the past few years, I have been pruning our trees, and I'm happy to share that things go well, at least in my opinion. So when you're looking at your poem, that's your before, right? You're taking a look at what exists, what's there. If you look at this tree, you'll notice we can see all of the branches growing up, the strong trunk. I'd like you to look at your poem and consider the perspective you're using in it, the message that you hope you're sharing with your audience, and even who that audience is. Are they bringing any information to the page? Do they have any shared experiences with your speaker that they can leap to? I'd also like you to think about how is the poem succeeding through its welcome to readers, the title, how are you pulling them into the poem, the point of view, the voice, language, diction, the form, how does it look on the page? How do the line breaks and stanza breaks influence the reader as they go through the poem? What kind of leaps are you using? How are you getting the audience to make connections outside of the poem to what your speaker's talking about, and how does the poem resolve itself. I'm going to set a timer for 4 minutes. I invite you to read your poem out loud as you survey your poem, but take some notes on it and think about how is it working? What's there? What are you starting with? Let's go. Halfway through. And if you've read your poem, and all right, I see what's there. If in this reflection there's anything you realize that you could develop, I would take those notes at this point. Start to finish up your notes, about 15 more seconds. And stop. If you had a really long poem, you want to pause the video, you are welcome to. Otherwise, we're going to move forward and think about how we can prepare to prune our poems. I made a note about development in the last slide. Sometimes we realize, oh, I could do more here. And that's, you can develop poems during this process too. But I'm thinking about pruning in this moment in terms of getting down to what's most potent, what's most necessary, what's really going to resonate with the reader. Sometimes in first drafts, we might take the first stanza to get to the point where the poem really starts because we needed to do some writing to get there. Or we might be writing all the things and our poem might be able to focus a little bit more. Or we maybe write past the resolution of that particular moment into a second poem. So when you are thinking about pruning, you're looking for places where the poem could be served by some change. Here in the picture, you'll notice I've circled stuff with the red digital pen. As I look at this as an amateur arborist, I'm seeing different places where limbs are growing inward. They're going to kind of grow through and hit the trunk, or they're a little bit overpopulated on the inside of the tree. It's important that you're taking out some of those branches to make sure there's enough air circulation around the trunk to keep the tree healthy, and it cuts down on disease and allows better photosynthesis. Look, you're learning about trees too. And then also places where limbs are crossing each other. They're rubbing up against each other, which can create damage to the bark and then allow disease a foothold. You can also think about pruning a little bit aesthetically as well. Clearly, some people do topiaries where they're turning their bushes into particular shapes. You might have a tree that you want to look like an upside down candy cone. So there's also an aesthetic shape as well. I personally tend to looking more at what would I need to take away for the tree to be as healthy as possible. We're going to set the timer for another 4 minutes, and I'd like you to identify places on your poem where you could uh, make changes. If you're working on paper with a pencil, you're recording all of these thoughts and notes. If you're working on the computer, you might want to copy what you have and then paste and then turn on track changes or start to make some notes and revisions there. If you are totally thrilled with your poem, feeling pretty pleased with it, then I give you the challenge. Try cutting your poem's words by 20%. So look at the word count, multiply by 0.2, and see that would be the number you're going to try and cut by. And you may think, no, what? I can't take away that many words. Just go in there and take them out. You can. It might make places of the poem fall apart, but in that exercise, you know that the original was working and you can take a couple steps backward to get there again. Are you ready? Setting the timer. Identify places in the poem where you could revise to strengthen the poem, clarify, maybe restructure it. Here we go. One more minute. Finish up that thought you just had. All right. If you were working on the computer, you may have been making changes as you went, but I wanted you to take a moment to execute the notes that you took and start to put together what the new version of the poem is going to look like. I'm going to set the timer for 3 more minutes. Make it so. Sorry. 1 more minute. Finish up your thought. If you need a little bit more time to finish that new draft of your poem, you're welcome to pause. Otherwise, we're going to move forward. So you can see a picture of our tree after it's been pruned. Lots more ability for air to get through those branches when the leaves are on during the the spring, and we're also reducing the amount of friction between those limbs. So if you typed up, please make sure that in your file there is at least one copy of the original poem. You can keep all of your notes in there, but so we can see the revised and the original side by side. And if you hand wrote everything, if you could please take that one extra step to type up the revised poem, and you can photograph the original and put it in that same file as a graphic. Follow the instructions for sharing your pre and post poem drafts with us. We can't wait to see them. Thanks so much for revising with us today.